Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Like all the shows that we have, welcome to the fifth episode of the second edition of SEM Talk Show. As you know that we have this talk show every fortnight, every 15 days, I mean every 2 weeks in fact. And the last one was on 8th April and next one is going to be on the 5th June after 2 weeks. And what we do usually with topics we choose from the responses to the survey that we send to you, all of you. So as usual, the session will be recorded, okay, and it will be made available on KnoWerX mobile app as well as the YouTube channel, free of cost. So you can even see it later on. We are putting everyone on listen only mode right now. So not that we don't want you to ask questions, but if you have any questions, please type your question in the chat box. And what we will do towards the end of the session, we will have some time reserved for the question answer session. And we will take the questions which are most asked, and then we will take some question. We may not be able to answer all the questions, or that it will all depend on the time. If time permits, we'll take all the questions. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Subhajit Mazumdar. Okay, so I know him for a very, very long time. He's a very seasoned professional in supply chain management, and he works as a director in the India strategic team with Microsoft. And he has a lot of credentials. I'll get tired reading all his credentials. He has close to 15 years of experience in management consulting, where he built expertise on strategy and operations, both for consumer products and retail industry. And that's the reason why we have chosen him for today's topic about his expertise. So he's worked across KPMG, E&Y, Infosys Consulting. His experience focused on defining customer and strategic growth strategy, designing and implementing customer experience, undertaking large-scale business transformation projects, spanning the entire supply chain management, sales distribution area, coupled with opportunity to digitize the value chain. So that's the trend nowadays. We talk about digitization of supply chain. He is certified supply chain professional CSCP from ASCM, that is Association of Supply Chain Management. Formerly it was known as APIX, and a certified and empaneled trainer for teaching ASCM courses in supply chain management in India geography. He was also a certified CX trainer on KPMG Nunwood. He is an alumnus of IIT Kharagpur and has completed an engineering emerging leader program from ISB. He has authored several thought leadership publications within firms that he's worked for, as well as national and international conferences. He has been an invited speaker at business premier B schools, campuses, and industry forums. He has been part of CIS National Committee for E-commerce for FY 1921, and he is a mentor on the 100watt.tech, India's first retail tech accelerator platform. So a lot of credentials. I cannot really talk about all of his. This is small list that I have talked about. So welcome Subhajit to this show. Welcome.
Thanks a lot. Good afternoon, Ravindra. Good afternoon,
Good
everybody
afternoon.
who's listening in today. I hope I'm
Good
audible
afternoon.
and clear.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And thank you everyone for taking time out and joining this session. So, without wasting any time, I'll start Subhajit with today's topic, which is retail and consumer product supply chain management. And since you have a great expertise on the other supply chains also, I mean, this is your specialty, but you have a lot of experience in other supply chains also. Let me ask you how this consumer product supply chain management differs from other supply chain management, which is not the same, So, and for the benefit of the participants, when I say other supply chain, apart from consumer products and supply chain, which one you're talking about other supply chains, and what is the difference between these chains?
Yeah. You're right, Ravindra. The the consumer and retail supply chain space has always been under more pressure than others. I would say that way, having been focused in this industry. When I say other supply chains, I would probably refer to industrial product supply chain more. The more B2B kind of supply chains that are prevalent. Those might be more capital intensive kind of supply chains, but I think consumer and retail has its own challenges and pressure, especially with a lot of retail and consumer products businesses turning omni-channel over the last 5 to 6 years. So whether you are a consumer products company or you are a retailer with physical stores, over the last 6 to 7 years, everybody's kind of converted their businesses to have more channels, and the online channel has particularly been prevalent. With that, most of these brands have basically built capabilities around direct to consumer. And the moment you do that, the expectations of the consumer start dictating what your supply chain needs to do, because the offering or the value perception of the consumer is no longer just the product or the service that you provide. It is actually the product plus the packaging, plus the logistics, plus the way it is delivered, the timeline in which it is delivered, and so on and so forth. And therefore, you see a lot of the popular e-com platforms as well as omni-channel retailers and even consumer brands for that matter, because now a lot of consumer brands today have their own direct channel, right? Promising a certain turnaround time for receiving the products or for delivery of the products. And if you see, customer satisfaction or customer experience is greatly tied to this ability of the supply chain to fulfill within these expectations. So therefore, I think if I look at how is the supply chain different, we have always talked about two paradigms of supply chain, right? One is the efficient supply chain, which is always focused on cost efficiency, getting the maximum efficiency out of the entire network, right? And we have talked about responsive. Now, responsive supply chain, I think, is going to a different level today, because it is no longer a supply chain. I think we are more and more talking about a supply network now, because it is not linear. It is literally, multinodal, with different participants of the supply chain coming together and actually helping each other. And pretty much the flow of material or information may be non-linear. It can be the fastest route within that network. So that is how I think the agility, the responsiveness is very critical for retail and consumer supply chains. And that keeps people on their toes. It's a very high pressure, stressful kind of a job of the people who manage these supply chains. And particularly taking the recent example of COVID, right? COVID-19, our wave one, pretty much disrupted the entire supply chain of the country. And what went into it, because I was very closely observing what e-commerce players were doing and consumer products were doing, all of them actually bolstered their supply chain in a big way, so that there are actually different multiple points of failure and multiple points of recovery in the supply chain today. So essentially, the supply chain has been decoupled at different points, so that if one part of it fails, the other part can still pick up and almost start serving the customers without any disruption. Because in the first wave, we definitely got disrupted. Now, in the wave two, over the last 1 or 2 months, if you've seen, the spike has been much bigger, but I think our supply chains have been much more resilient in this phase. So I'll pause there. Ravi, you are on mute.
I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Subhajit. That's a very big distinction about omni-channel. I think that is probably missing from industrial goods. So one question I have in mind, consumer products are usually make to stock, which always will be, and therefore its planning heavily depends on the good sales forecast. And I think one of the concern, I think everybody who is here as a participant in supply chain is demand management and accurate forecast. That's been a concern. But usually it is believed that sales of consumer products is a continuous and uniform sale. So it's very easy to do sales forecasting and very accurately and so on. So what do you comment on that?
See, forecasting has never been an easy exercise. I think getting accuracy of forecast, especially when you start improving and you start reaching the late 80s and the early 90s, from there even a 1% incremental improvement takes a lot in the company to make that happen. I think I'll break up this question into two parts. So consumer products is slightly different. If you take the typical CPG, FMCG kind of companies, uh, they definitely have a very robust sales forecasting process, and it happens at different points in time. So the first one possibly happens when the AOP is run, typically in the last quarter of the fiscal year for the next fiscal year. So the annual operating plan is run, and within that, the sales budget or the sales forecast is a very critical component, because that helps the company predict the financial goals for the next year, right? Because sales revenue primarily contributes to it. So there is that initial sales budget, and obviously you can break it up into 6 months. I mean, H1, H2, and then quarterly, and so on and so forth. And then typically what companies would do is they would definitely maintain a rolling forecast. So they would pick up that first initial budget and take the first 3 months, and every month they will basically, as they move on, the actuals will get updated for the first month, and you will keep rolling the forecast, right? When you roll the forecast, you will actually try and incorporate the market signals that you are getting, because even the first forecast had captured the seasonality, the regional trends, brand preference, all of that tacit information which the company has, because it has historical sales data, it has historical consumer preference data, and so on and so forth in the company. Even to that, there are minor tweaks, because, for example, a few years back, if you remember, when demonetization happened, it had a very different kind of an impact on the supply chain. It did not follow, it broke all the records of seasonality, and there was suddenly a rush to uh, purchase things. A lot of merchants were not ready. So on the other hand, there was actually a lot of dip in sales, which should not have happened. So there are those external factors which they try to incorporate. So every month they try to bring in that intelligence. And that signal is a mix of many things. So one is, obviously there is a bottoms up approach to capture this feedback, where this feedback is possible, is actually available with the field force, the sales force of the company, who go around the country selling these to the retailers. And the retailers, distributors also provide that voice to the company. Apart from that, a lot of companies, what they have done is they have basically started picking up market signals through the digitization channel. So basically, what is trending on social media, what is being spoken about in consumer forums, what are the different kinds of preferences, if you have discussion boards and leaderboards and so on and so forth that you maintain. So your social media channels and your marketing channels provide a lot of input that is possible to be obtained. A lot of FMCG, CPG companies also employ, consumers into what we call FGDs, which is focus group discussions, to understand what are the emerging trends. So all of this goes into these monthly updates to reflect the forecast as accurately as possible. Now, there is a very typical thing that happens practically, because you can always have the most scientific forecast, versus every company has an aspiration to grow at a certain rate. And if you find that the forecast and the aspiration or the target that you want to achieve, there is a gap, typically companies would employ other kind of tactics to make that happen. So for example, marketing promotions will come in, discounts will come in, new offerings will come in, or new bundling of products will come in. So those are all different marketing and sales strategies which will get enabled to basically make the forecast closer to what you want to aspire for. So forecast is a scientific view of what is the actual demand. The target is closer to the demand that you want to shape. And that's what I think actively, supply chain and sales managers continue to do. A very critical interlock that happens between supply chain and sales is the sales and operations planning, the S&OP meeting that typically happens every month. And literally companies go line by line across all the SKUs to say that what what was the forecasted figure, what is the revised figure based on the amendments, what is the production plan, and how can the supply chain fulfill that demand quantity. So that's on the CPG FMCG briefly. In retail, it is slightly different. Retail or e-commerce, there is always a forecast by the store, by region, by SKU, by category, and so on and so forth. And again, rate of sales is something that retailers track very, very closely. Rate of sales is basically a form of throughput. So if the forecast was to sell 100 SKUs or 100 units of a certain SKU in a month, in the first week, did you sell 25%? Did you sell 30%? What is the skew of sales? And therefore, what can you do to kind of keep liquidating stock at the stores so that you achieve that throughput? A healthy rate of sales is typically in the range of 80 to 90%, that people would want to achieve. And what if and what retailers typically keep seeing during the period is how is it moving across their regions and stores, and therefore there are often products which do an there are inter-store transfers and so on and so forth which happen, because if a particular product is not selling in a particular region but it's doing better in another region, it's wise to kind of do that inter-location transfer ahead of time so that you're able to sell it off. So these are some of the tactics that people use. I think and the accuracy is measured. Obviously, there are standard methods to measure forecast accuracy. In my experience, typically good companies, leading companies, typically at an aggregate level, 85 to 90 to 93% is a very good number to have. At the aggregate level, obviously, it is better. As you go down, you may actually see dips in that performance because an individual SKU is more difficult to forecast. So, yeah, over to you, Ravi.
Yeah, right. Great, great. So a lot of insights into what FMCG, CPG, and what retailers do. Now, my next question is how this technology is helping to improve the forecasting more and more, better and better. You know.
Yeah, yeah,
So what? So I think are there any tools? Are there any algorithms, or what is the technology is doing?
yeah. See, I mean, many years back as well, when in the days of ERP, etc., you had demand forecasting as a standard module, and it would typically use the uh, traditional time series methods of forecasting, so which is basically based on historical data. And ERPs were all about historical data because all the transactional data was available. That was the old way of doing it. People would typically have that system view, and then that system view would be moderated with a lot of additional inputs like uh, getting bottoms up views from the field force, distributors, looking at syndicated surveys. So typically CPG FMCG companies employed a lot of research from likes of Nielsen or IMRB to understand what is the category demand in different parts of the country. Those surveys actually happen through people on the feet, covering maybe 15,000, 20,000 retailers, and understanding the sense of demand. But more recently, what I've seen is what I call a smart digital package for planning, for supply chain planning, which is more of custom built AI ML kind of models, where you create a model, you train the model on a limited data set, which is historical, but the model keeps learning. So as and when your new categories, new products keep launching, The model is trained on those new data sets, and continuously the accuracy and the predictability of those models actually improve over time. And I think all of them have complemented these kind of smaller niche tools. These tools really now don't come from the biggies, like they don't come necessarily from the SAP and the Oracles of the world. They may come even from small boutique firms who actually have modeled a supply chain forecasting process very beautifully. And these models are even available at a category level. So let's say you will find a very niche solution for, say, footwear forecasting, or you will find a very niche solution that does very well for apparel forecasting, and people typically pick that because that's more contextual, much more relevant, get that input. And then apart from that, obviously there are these manual interventions which are there. So that's how it's largely changing. And what is also changing is the signals that the field force and the people down the chain actually collect is much more real time, because a lot of people, whether it is retail, whether it is CPG, have invested in Salesforce automation kind of tools. So these tools, again, digital tools are available on people's smartphones, very simple Android phones, not very expensive. These apps are there, and therefore any disruption, any change in customer preference, any trend that the field force is able to pick is input much earlier, and that goes in as an input to the model much earlier. So even within the month, I have seen, people typically taking a view of what the production plan or the distribution plan should be for the next few weeks, and they're able to change that. So it's much more agile, it's much more data driven, and there is essentially a science that applies to it, and incrementally people get benefits out of it.
Great, great. So my one more question I have on forecasting. There is this new tool or new methodology called DDMRP, demand-driven MRP. So it talks about that, forecasting is definitely required at the strategic level and even at the tactical level. But at the operations level, operating level, it says, instead of forecasting, we should feed the actual customer order. And of course, there'll be some buffers somewhere. It's not that, the buffers are zero. It's not make to order, but it's make to stock, but still there are some buffers. But, the entire, I would say, execution starts based on actual customer orders. So have you seen this sort of application somewhere, or people being talked about even in CP or CPG, FMCG?
Yeah, I have actually seen some of the leading companies employ, software tools that are based on these concepts. Uh, and these were essentially called demand sensing tools. So you basically don't forecast, but the concept is you try to sense demand, and you sense demand through these early inputs of orders, etc. Whether it really works very significantly different or not is something that has to be seen over a longer period of time, which at least I was not fortunate enough to observe it. Like, once you implement, initially when you implement, it has very incremental benefit over a traditional method. But over time, actually, it builds its prowess, and it can give you supposedly much more radical benefit. I haven't been able to really observe firsthand whether it does, but I have seen widespread adoption of these kind of tools now with the leading brands. So a lot of investments into these advanced technologies and concepts have been done, and more companies are actually conceptually and philosophically, they're moving from traditional supply chains to demand-driven supply chains. So yeah.
All right. So that's a great information for all of us. Now, actually, we talked about omni-channel and multiple channels. Then we talked about forecasting. What other challenges are there in FMCG, CPG, supply chain, retail supply chain, which are quite unique and different?
Yeah, yeah. See, I think first of all, in a country like India, it poses a lot of different kinds of challenges, because frankly, supply chain logistics may all sound very fancy when you study in textbooks, but when you go out in the market and you need to talk to those supply chain participants and make them adhere to certain data standards and processes and all, it is extremely, extremely difficult. I have personally firsthand worked with distributors, CNFAs, uh, in hinterlands and different parts of the country. And there are language challenges, there are understanding challenges, and so on and so forth. I think, first of all, ability to get 70-80% of your supply chain adhere to a certain standard and governance of data and insights itself is a big challenge, which has to be driven through governance, through compliance mechanisms, and so on and so forth. So good performance is usually incentivized, and bad performance, multiple instances of that means that you will be replaced by somebody else. What is also happening is, over the last 10 years or so, as I have dealt with these kind of third party 3PL, 4PL operators, I've seen that, the professionalism and their own tech savviness becomes a criteria for brands to select these partners more and more, because everybody now slowly wants to, and slowly and gradually wants to work with professional partners rather than, traditional partners. And therefore, a lot of the supply chain partners have been forced to get onto systems and processes which the brands do. So typically, I'll just, like, hypothetically take a small town of Meerut or a Panipat or some hinterland where, there is a distributor sitting and who works with, let's say, Nestle's of the world and HULs of the world, would actually have different teams. These are data entry operators essentially, who are working on different systems provided by the brands, and they fill in the data at the frequency in the format that the brand wants. Because one distributor typically works with multiple brands, and he has to adhere and comply with the requirements of this brand. So there's a lot of modernization that's happening in the extended supply chain as well, but it takes a little bit of time. And on the other hand, if you look at logistics, again, whether it is the transportation infrastructure or whether it is the storage infrastructure, both were not very matured in India till about last 5-6 years. Where now in the last 5-6 years, you've seen a lot of modernization. You've seen automation of warehouses and so on and so forth coming much more prevalent than early days, which actually gives more accuracy, more visibility, lesser shrinkage. All of those benefits come with that. But I think in India, that's big. That's the biggest challenge, because the aspiration of the brand versus the supply chain partner maturity, there's a big gap.
So in India, what kind of inventory turnovers do we expect in FMCG and CPG?
See, by categories, it would vary quite a bit. But I mean, if you talk about the forward cover that one would want to have optimally or would want to drive, uh, so in a foods category kind of a business, maybe at a DC level, you would want to keep, you would want to keep about 45 days of stock, roughly 45 to 60 days of stock. And if you take other kinds of categories which are not so fast moving, maybe if these are CPG, it may be around 60 to 90 days. So that's typically the forward cover that people want to maintain. And similarly in retail, again, it's very different. So if you take groceries or uh, grocery supermarket kind of chains, then they would have more turns compared to, say, a category like fashion or apparel, which has lesser. But more and more, what people are doing as a concept, even in apparel and fashion, what they want to do is they want to have higher turns. And traditionally, if you saw how they planned for the year, they typically planned for 2 seasons, which was called spring, summer, and autumn, winter. This is a very common terminology. I think we keep seeing these in our, the promos that we see on in the newspapers also. But now people are generally moving out of that 2 season concept to saying, literally the leading ones are saying every month is a season for me. So instead of having 2 seasons, I would have 12 seasons, and I would actually plan for fresh stock. For each month, I would have freshness in my stores, and I'm going to turn that inventory around. So I'm going to plan only that much, manufacture only that much, place it in the store, get it sold within 30 to 45 days, and turn in my new stock. So that's the kind of agility which is called fast fashion. That's the terminology that's being used in the industry. Every fashion is almost moving to fast fashion now, where you have more turns and you actually plan for. So it's a great value proposition for the customer also, because there is always freshness. So think about it, how many times you would visit a apparel store, right? Maybe once in a month at most, unless you are a freak. So if you went the second time, you would actually see a lot of new offerings in the store, which will actually propel you to come back more. So that's how supply chain is keeping in line with changing customer preferences for freshness.
Great. On a lighter moment, I was going to say that how many times customers visit the store depends on whether you are men or women.
Yeah.
So women, they visit more often than men.
Yeah.
So my next question, in the retail space, what other unique challenges are there? So you talked about FMCG and CPG, and in the retail, I'm sure the supply chain is very, very different as compared to wholesale distribution or manufacturing,
Yeah.
whether FMCG or whatever, but very, very different kind of challenges. So what challenges they face?
Yeah. See, I think first of all, retail, in the business of retail, uh, every store is considered a P&L. So every store has to be profitable, essentially. I mean, that's the end goal for a retailer. And there is also a pressure to keep expanding the store. So there is a store network that keeps building and is always continuously evolving, because at a very high rate of growth, when brands are growing, I have seen retailers uh, seeing 30 to 40 new store openings in a particular month, in the country, right? So in one month they open about 20 to 30 new stores in new locations, right? And there's always a pipeline of new stores. So the first of all, the supply chain network is continuously evolving, because when you open a store, the moment you open a store, it's a node in your supply chain, and it has to be fulfilled, serviced, not just forward supply chain but backward supply chain as well. Because when you will place merchandise in the store, it'll sell, but if it doesn't sell within a reasonable amount of time, it also has to be pulled back and it has to be placed somewhere else. So there is this complexity that keeps increasing. Uh, so supply chain network is much more dynamic. That's the first thing I would probably say, because compared to CPG, FMCG, which is much more static, because it's in your hands how many distributors you're going to open and where you will open these distributors. But in this case, almost every month you're expanding. The second aspect is you are handling multiple supply chains. So there is obviously the physical supply chain network. All of these retailers also have an online channel. They also serve to the marketplaces, the third-party marketplaces, like the likes of Amazon and Flipkart and so on and so forth. So that is again a separate inventory pool, and it has its own supply chain. The consignment arrangements for all these supply chain are also different. So I think supply chain management complexity is much more in omni-channel retailer today than consumer products, which is much more straightforward to that extent.
And I think number of SKUs will be much, much higher also in case of
Yes, yes.
retail.
So typically, if you look at assortment, larger supermarkets, hypermarkets easily would have 50,000 to 1 lakh kind of SKUs just in one store. And when the merchandise and assortment planning is done, and this is done typically pre-season and in season. So pre-season is when you actually plan for it, because any brand entry, etc., or brand exit, all of that is planned at the beginning of the season. But once you are in the season, you also do this in-season planning to ensure that you are always optimal. It is quite an exercise. And unfortunately, Ravi, in India, planning exercise with retailers was largely on Excel sheets even 5, 6 years back. Because no tool was flexible enough to adapt to changing environments, changing requirements, and so on and so forth. So the physical scenario would change so fast that the system would lag behind. Slowly and steadily, I think there are some, tools which are coming in and they have got implemented in some of these large retail chains, and now planning might be happening there. But I'm pretty sure that even then, 80% planning might be happening in the system and 20% planning still happens outside the system to take care of things. So it's fairly complex for that matter.
No, I agree. As per the Excel part is concerned, if Excel licenses are pulled out from the entire industry, I think industry will collapse.
Yeah.
Whether it's retail or FMCG or industrial goods or whatever it is, I think
Yeah.
we heavily depend on Excels.
Yeah.
Even though we have tools available, but I think that 80/20
Yeah.
or sometimes 20/80, whatever that is. Yeah,
Correct.
absolutely. Thank you so much. So my next question is about one technique called CPFR. I think when we give Apex exams and we study and a lot of we talk about CPFR, I think it starts somewhere at the Walmart and PNG somewhere the experiment started. So have you seen anything? Is there any cases here, or have you seen somewhere which is implemented
Yeah.
and really working?
No, absolutely. I think all the major retailers are using a CPFR, at least some part of it, if not the entire CPFR. So planning definitely happens, replenishment definitely happens. Um, how it happens is, let me take the example of one or two of these leading grocery retail chains in India. So typically, if you look at their assortment, see broadly, there are two buckets. So there is a private label bucket because everybody has a good sizable chunk of private label. And then you have the brands. Whenever it is with brands, what you do is for that particular category, subcategory, you actually work with that brand very closely to forecast. And your feet on the store and the brand associates are also deployed on the stores actually, so you typically have merchandisers from brands who are deployed in major stores with the objective of pushing their brands in the store. So imagine a section of, let's say, washing detergent powders, okay, and you have maybe a HUL and a PNG variants there. Each of them will actually put their merchandise to push their thing. So there is a lot of signal that comes from these brands as well, and they are able to forecast jointly to say that this is the trend that we see, this is how much we've sold, we would want to plan for so and so. What is the mix of different SKUs that we want to keep? Because maybe the smaller packs are doing well versus the larger packs. Maybe a new variant of a brand is doing better, so let's introduce that brand. Maybe let's create a end cap for it, which gives you more visibility, and it's kind of put on promotion for doing that. All of that planning, not just the stock planning, but the assortment planning, the pricing strategy, the promo strategy, all of that is done together with the brands. And retailers would not do this. So if you look at from a retailer perspective, you might be working with at any point in time, say 500 brands in your store. You would probably do this kind of collaborative planning with the top 10, top 15, which contribute to say 20%. So it's a Pareto rule. So 20% of your vendor or of your brands actually contribute to maybe 80% of your sales. You will do with them. You will not be doing with everybody. For the rest, it is a forecast mechanism that the retailer runs and just places the order saying this much is required. So that's how it happens. It absolutely happens in practice, and both these parties are, hand in glove in terms of doing this. Another very interesting emerging practice which has been there. It's not very emerging now, but at least 7, 8 years back, it was definitely emerging. Is what we call the DSD model, which is direct store delivery model. So essentially, this is like a VMI. If you think of it, it's a vendor managed inventory where the brand says, you don't worry about the product availability on your shelf. This is my responsibility. The moment there are 2 units less, it is my responsibility how I'm going to ship it there. So these inventory don't even come into the warehouse of the retailer. These inventory remain with a warehouse or a stocking location which the brand creates, which may be near to the store from a fulfillment perspective. So it has very high service levels. It ensures that all the products are always available, and the cost of stocking, etc., is on the part of the brand. So a lot of direct store delivery model has also been established with brands.
Great. Good to know that CPFR is being used, if not to full extent, at least to some extent. I also have questions about, very popular technique in retail, especially with DCs and DCs to stores, of a warehousing technique called cross-docking and flow-through.
Yeah.
So, how much of that is being used in practice, and how much of that you have seen in India particularly?
Again, Ravi, happy to let you know that these practices are all it's being practiced by most leading brands. So typically, products which are in high volume and high and show high turns often are they follow the method of flow through. So they basically are not stocked within the DC, but they are put in a staging location where from there again they are kind of uh, bulk broken and distributed to different locations. So it happens for select categories and select brands at different points in time, and DC to DC this percentage changes. But in my experience, I have seen this happening in fairly good number of retail warehouses.
Great, wonderful, wonderful. So, any other unique warehousing techniques that you have seen in India, which probably will not be available anywhere in the world, in either in the DC or in the stores or the back room or somewhere?
Back rooms are there. So depending on the category, like footwear, typically back room is very common because you display only one style of some size, but you don't display all the sizes of the same style in any place. So back room is very, very prevalent there. Even in grocery kind of retail stores, you see back rooms. Apparel kind of retail don't see so much of backroom, so you want to show everything that you have in the display area itself. um, Nothing very different. I mean, I've also worked across different geographies, so extensively worked across APAC and EMEA, and I have seen pretty much similar kind of concepts being followed. In India, maybe the facilities are not that great. I mean, the infrastructure and the facilities are somewhat makeshift, and they are not that great. If you go to a Middle Eastern warehouse of, let's say, a Carrefour or a lifestyle, you will see very clean, neat and clean, very disciplined warehouse personnel. Processes are being adhered. India, there's a little bit of catching up to be done there, but it's getting better over time.
Absolutely, yeah, a lot of catching up maybe.
Yeah.
So let me actually go to some different segment of this talk show about your personal career journey. So let me actually ask you, beginning from your school education, how did you ended up landing here where you are currently? How did you come here?
I think I'll go back to my B school days, which I think is going to be relevant for most people here listening in and where I am today. So, when I was doing in my B school days, I was very clear that I will focus on operations and supply chain as a specialization. Partly because the faculty we had was the best in that area. The second was when I was dabbling in my first trimester or so, different things, I realized that things which are physical attract me much more. I'm very good at understanding, conceptualizing, and driving things which are physical, like these are tangible things in front of me. And I loved uh, defining layouts, defining processes, modeling some of these inventory models and all. So that was my interest, and I always had Apex. In those days, it was Apex in mind that I need to do this uh, globally recognized certification because it had a lot of recall and reputation in the US particularly. And to be frank, it was expensive. So as a student, I could not afford it. So, and I couldn't afford because if I missed passing the exam, then it would be very very colossal loss. So I waited till the time I joined back. So after MBA, I joined a management consulting firm, and I was into business processes and operations. So then I ventured and I did my Apex CSCP certification. I also studied for CPIM, by the way, but I didn't take the exams. And I know the difference between both, but uh, basically what it did was for me was it helped me first of all augment my knowledge which I had acquired formally from a management course and what I was learning on the job. So it made me much more stronger on the concepts and the application. And the second thing that it did was I distinctly remember I made one career switch where from a process consulting kind of job, I moved into hardcore operations consulting, supply chain consulting. And that move, the positioning of Apex helped me because it was very evident on my CV at that time that one is I have worked, second is I have done something additionally while working to do this, and it was my passion to kind of work in that space. So that really helped me, Ravi. And after that, because I was passionate, my journey. So I have also trained for several batches of people who have done CSCP later, and some of them have also turned out to be CSCPs after that. So I know that they passed the exam, and it has been very fulfilling to kind of extend that knowledge, that experience, and almost reliving my own journey through them after several years. So it has been very very value adding. I think uh, people should actually see it in that light, that it is a mechanism to add value to their careers.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, apart from CSCP, do you have any other events or experiences in your career which helped you shape your career and grow faster?
No event as such. I think, frankly, it is only about continuous hard work and focus and commitment and doing all the things that everybody knows here. I think there is no other magic wand which will come and help. But um, for example, I did a leadership course in ISB at a time when I reached, when I became a director with KPMG. Then I got that, and that again helped me get leadership perspectives to lead a practice and build a community of practice. So those kind of interventions always help. But for me, the supply chain certification and the teaching experience, I think, was one phase of my career when I was leading a lot of supply chain work for customers, and I could bring live experiences to students when I was teaching, and in turn, I could actually apply back those principles again to my customers. So both ways it was working for me. Uh, this was mostly between, I think, 2013 to 2017. So those 4 5 years, I think, was extensively, I did a lot of work with supply chain.
So, can you share some aha moments, which you really feel great about, proud about, and you feel, yeah, this is why I was there in supply chain. This is how it helped my customers. Talk about some of those.
No, absolutely. I think the I think one of the aha moments was passing CSCP way back in 2009, and In my time, the exam used to be a pen and paper exam. So I was in Bangalore and I wrote this exam in IISc. So it was a physical exam that happened in IISc. And I remember that we used to have those OMR sheets, so you had to scribble those OMR sheets. But when the result came, it was definitely a very big aha moment because this was something I had gunned for a long time, and because of funds and other things, as I said, I waited for the time when I could fund it with my own salary. That was one. I think the other thing which has defined my career a lot is between 2013 and 2017 or so, I have almost worked with every leading retailer in the country and some abroad in defining their omni-channel strategy. So a lot of the platforms that I use today as a consumer, uh, and I don't want to name them, but they are the leading ones in Bombay and Bangalore and others, almost the usual names that will come to you. All from concept to delivery, it took 3 4 years for people to build those capabilities, but I've been a part of that journey, and that has been immensely satisfying because uh, we moved from retail 1.0 to retail 2.0, and now we need to do more, but there is no very clear benchmark as to what is 3.0, because it is more of doing things better already that you've implemented. So something very new or radical has not come, but establishing this whole omni-channel, both front end, back end, technology, process, organization, everything, setting that up for multiple businesses of apparel, grocery, etc. All of that, I think, has been very defining for me. So,
Really feels very, very great.
yeah, yeah.
Right. So, what is your advice, career advice to all our participants, to grow in the career, to grow in supply chain? Do you have any tips? Do you have any guidelines, guidance, or let's say specializations into certain technologies or domains or functionality? Anything that you have an advice for them?
I think one is to be very thorough with the concepts and to learn, because every time when I have gone back to the books and every time I kept teaching, this was also a learning experience for me. I found new nuggets of wisdom or knowledge which maybe I missed previous time. So it is so subtle that you have to keep revisiting. I think it is not a one-time event that you get certified and you are done. Even the certification you need to renew, right, over a period. But I think every time I've gone back, I have learned more, and therefore I think that keeping in touch with those concepts, principles, knowledge is very important, and then applying it in the right manner. So once you have learned a concept, I think it's very important that you take it out and apply it in a real world environment and learn from it. Because when you apply it, you will realize that getting the data, making the assumptions, all of that is not so easy as it was written in the textbook. So you will have to apply your mind. But once you have done it, and once that starts working for you or your customer or your organization, I think there'll be immense satisfaction. So that's what I would kind of say, that it's very important for youngsters to kind of focus on that continuously. And there's a lot of resources which Apex or ASCM has, right? And I think people need to keep going back to that and tap in that wisdom from time to time.
Thank you so much, Subhajit. So I think we'll stop here. I'll hand over to Nistush now because I think some of the participants have asked questions. So we will take their questions now. Over to you, Nistush now.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Subhajit sir, for sharing your views on this topic. It was really interesting to listen. So I'll take questions from the audience. The first question is by Mr. Satish Kulkarni. He asks that what are the best available tools for forecasting, and would also like to know about forecasting tools which work on average demand.
Okay. See, I wouldn't want to call out a few names here because I myself come from a software company now, and I do not want to mention any name here. But basically, if you go to Gartner or Forrester and just search on forecasting tools, you will get the list of the best-in-class tools that are available, which serve those purposes. Apart from that, I think uh, look at some of these boutique products which are there, which have been, if you're a practitioner and let's say you're looking for this tool uh, from your own industry perspective, then look at some of the tools that your industry has used and has got good results. So I used to work with a bunch of such niche boutique platforms which actually used to give quite good results in some of my projects. These were not very big implementations. Another, I think one of the things you should also understand is, all this tools business and the software business today, it is about agile implementation and getting quick results. It is not about doing a very big, long transformation project which gives you results after 2 years. So typically use products which are easy to tweak, flexible, quick to implement. You can do a POC and get a result quickly out of it. So hope that answers. I just want to refrain from providing any names because that wouldn't be right for me.
Sure, sure, absolutely agree to that. So we'll move to the next question. So there are two questions from squadron leader Vijay Kumar. So we'll take it one by one. So the first question is: we see that across many many big shopping conglomerates like Big Bazaar, More Shopee, Big Star Bazar are closing down due to losses. So what are the reasons as per you, and how can supply chain help in reducing such type of volatility?
See, what you're seeing today definitely has an impact of COVID as well over the last 1.5 years, and you will have to slightly see this whole problem in two lenses. One is the pre-COVID lens and the post-COVID lens. Post-COVID lens, obviously, because people don't travel to these stores, there may be some orders coming in, but those orders may not be sufficient. Particularly large format stores have had a very bad time because then it's very difficult to hold on to rentals and lease and other things and keep operating. But even pre-COVID, there were obviously store closures that used to happen. And the reason has to be analyzed from the fact that, when a new store opening is done, there are a lot of factors in terms of location assessment, the catchment assessment, all of that is done by the company before they open. So very thorough market surveys done, customer segments that are typically prevalent in the 5 kilometer radius is seen. If you are going and opening the store inside a mall, then retailers typically see what other brands are available in the mall. In essence, what is the positioning of that mall and what kind of customer segments it draws. So all of these assumptions go into opening a store and a format and deciding the format. Now, if that assessment has been wrong, then we have seen stores closing after some time because it has just not been able to pick up. Or sometimes, everything that you assumed was right, but maybe there was another competition that you just couldn't beat. So these are usually the reasons why a store would close. But if those fundamentals, so therefore those fundamentals are very important to get right at the beginning. And typically there's a lot of research that happens before those stores are done. And see, the break even for a store, by my experience, is anywhere between 15 to 18 months, not less than that. Sometimes it may be even 24 months. And brands will keep pumping in money and keep supporting it till it arrives that stage. Uh, yeah, and then beyond that, maybe it will look at a, so retailers typically have a very common analysis which they do. They do their top 10 stores and top bottom 10 store analysis every month. So they keep seeing which are the stores which are top performing, what are the metrics, what are the stores which are bottom, and consistently, if it keeps coming at the bottom, then there's something wrong. So they'll try all tactical means to lift that store in terms of assortment, in terms of customer service, in terms of better promotions. But if it doesn't work after that, also after a reasonable amount of time, then they're best to best to stop it.
Correct. Right. So I'll take the second question from Squadron Leader itself. So he says, just a second. Right. Can you please share some insights on integrity checks in supply chain functions?
Uh, so the procurement side definitely has a lot of integrity aspects which need to be kept, and there are compliance governance around it, in the sense that uh, the process is fair and transparent. Uh, there is no kickbacks or any other unethical practice that is happening through the procurement team or the purchaser. There are typically multiple levels of checking. In retail, there is a control which you would, maybe some of you would know who are from that industry, is what is called the OTB, which is open to buy. So open to buy is actually a budgetary control which is there, which ensures that a buyer cannot buy more inventory than what is required and what is approved at a level of category, subcategory level. So those options are there. That is more prevalent in terms of integrity. And then obviously, this applies to any other professional role, right? I mean, all of us work in different roles, and I think integrity plays different roles in our daily lives. Uh, so I don't think supply chain solves for it. It is the human who has to solve for it. Doing the right practices, doing the right processes, right? No amount of rules will solve for it.
Correct. So we have started getting a lot of questions now. So I'll quickly take last three questions actually. So this is from Mr. Parishek Garg. What kind of tools can help omni-channel retailers? I see dynamic demand which traditional tools can't capture. And adding to that, how to differentiate offline versus online demand?
Okay. So when retailers move from being a single channel to multi-channel or omni-channel, so essentially when they move from being a network of physical stores to going into their own online channel, third-party online channel, and so on and so forth, what used to happen is, initial days, what used to happen is there was a very extensive process of planning and buying, which used to happen for the physical business. And typically in the early days, physical business used to contribute to anywhere between 90 to 95% of the overall business. So online used to be around 5%. Like even 3, 4 years back, if somebody was doing more than 10% on online, it was great. COVID has completely changed that. COVID would have radically changed that in many brands. But that was the share. And that's why what used to happen is the priority and the rigor that used to go in terms of planning and buying would be in that ratio, so everything would be done for the systems, the templates, the Excel, whatever it was, all of that would work for the physical business, and then online would just be like, let's increase another 5% of the forecast, let's increase another 10% on the forecast, just apportion it in the same ratio that you have done for physical. But that is not true, because online behavior and preference for SKUs are very different from offline. And that is why the planning was going wrong in most retailers during the early days. So every retailer, essentially what they did was, over the last 3, 4 years, they have gone for creation of an integrated planning process and system, where the process is similar and similarly rigorous to ensure that what is the online demand, what is the offline demand, and then sum it up rather than just extrapolating one from another. Earlier, I have seen across most of the companies, it was just an extrapolation, because nobody would think of online. There was one person who was leading online, like literally one person, versus let's say a 10, 15 person member, team member, a team working on. So now it has changed. It is now more real time. It is the signals feed in more from the platform. So for example, if you are a brand shop on a third party marketplace, or you sell on that marketplace, you typically get a monthly MIS from the marketplace, which actually tells you out of your catalog which SKUs are doing well, which SKUs are not doing well in that same period, another brand which was similar to yours, what sold. So from all those signals, you can actually plan better that what should you place on that channel, because you don't place your entire assortment on online typically. If your entire assortment is 100, you plan for maybe 20, 25 to be placed on online, which is where you want speed and agility for sales. So you know that this kind of products will sell the best, okay, out there. So that choice is made using these signals.
Perfect. So, uh, a question related to career, and probably a lot of people would wanting to know about it. So, Mr. Amit is asking, how do you see scope of functional consultants in SCM domain in coming years?
I see a huge scope because supply chain is going to be will continue to remain a very critical element to be improved and to be worked upon for ages. And there is no destination in this. This is a journey. You can't say that I have arrived and I have reached the optimal level, of performance ever, because if with every improvement, remember, everybody else is also improving and the general infrastructure is improving. So I see a lot of demand going forward next many years. So it's just lot of scope. I think if you can blend your supply chain skills with some digital skills like analytics. So supply chain analytics is a very hot topic within supply chain and supply chain digital. So if you can complement your skills there, so you understand supply chain and you have the skills of a data scientist, you are like an awesome package for the industry.
Fantastic. KnoWerX is also in phase of launching a certificate in the supply chain data analytics segment. So uh, that that really helps. All right. So the next question is from Harmeet Singh. We have seen a new concept of D2C, which a lot of companies are focusing now. How these companies manage CTS, cost to serve, and how do we have some case studies on this concept?
Yeah. So, like I was saying, when I was touching upon FMCG and CPG, I was saying that a lot of these brands have done direct to consumer, right? And they have their own online channel or they have their own call center to take orders. The channel can be anything, but basically you are directly supplying to the customer, and your intermediaries are not playing a role there. The cost to serve will come after some time, so you will not have optimal cost to serve in the initial days. But why most brands have gone for it is, for more because of marketing and customer oriented strategies, because every brand now wants to basically be intimate with the customer and wants to have a footprint. So a lot of companies have gone for subscription models. So for example, if I am a brand and I am into staples and I know that you will need 10 of my products every month, I will basically try and get you to sign up for a subscription program on my site, and I will ensure that I directly supply the product to you. Why am I doing that? One is I get to know the customer signals directly rather than going to distributors and retailers and doing very expensive surveys. So this is a means for me to get insights as well. I may not make profits right from the beginning, and a lot of times the online channel is not making a profit for FMCG brands today, but they still run it because there are different benefits, strategic benefits which are there for the brand to continue.
Got it. So the last question for the day, Mr. Subhajit, this is by Mr. Vipul Jain. What are the future prospects of a small kirana store?
Yeah. So see, this debate about organized retail and unorganized retail has been there for many, many decades across the world. And actually, unorganized retail will not die. Okay. Because unorganized retail, and especially in a country like ours, where every nook and corner has a kirana store, that kind of serviceability is just not possible for organized retail. But if you see the trends that are happening, all these kirana stores are getting onto a platform. And what I mean by that is, the likes of, let's say, hyper-local models, which a lot of e-commerce players had, so the likes of Grofers or Big Basket or others had, or let's say even the likes of Geo or a more, what they're trying to do is they're essentially trying to take promising Kirana stores into their fold. Therefore, the Kirana does not need to go to a distributor, but the retailer can become the distributor for the Kirana store. So supply and serviceability improves, quantity, I mean, stock is always assured. The second thing is they are getting these kiranas onto a platform even for customer management. So what happens is the retailers, customers, insights are obtained by the retailer as well. So you know that in this locality, if I am selling atta, what is the preference of customer for atta within a certain age group? I am able to get those kind of insights by these things. So Kiranas overall will basically be part of one or more platforms, and slowly their business will also become a platform business where they are able to get orders, they are able to fulfill. But what is very unique about them, which other organized retailers cannot match them, is their intimate knowledge of the end customer. The Kirana almost knows that what I as a customer, what brand I keep, buying, be it any category, and that intimacy will remain. So Kiranas are going to remain, but the form and shape and the ecosystem through collaboration is going to change.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for such great insights, Mr. Subhajit. Thank you, Ravindra sir, for hosting the session. It was great to have you both, and thank you for taking out time to the audience. I hope you have taken a lot from this session, and there'll be great learning. If you like this format of SCM Talk Show, please spread the word among your friends and your colleagues. We want to see as many people participating and learning from the show. So the next talk show is on 5th of June, and the topic for that is agriculture supply chain, a relatively new topic and a very different one. So I'm sure a lot of you would want to listen more on that. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend ahead. Stay safe, stay indoors.
Thanks, everyone. Lovely talking to you, Ravindra. Stay safe, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.